Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all this craziness today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany, or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the incredibly brutal murder of a 26-year-old Australian woman named Anita Cobby, or as you may also know her as Anita Lynch. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. So go ahead and do those things and join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both Bratterstein, but no pressure. So now that I'm done essentially begging you to join my cult, we can get into this case. And now this case is a really heavy one. And now if you've been here before, you know, or you may know, that I don't typically do like trigger warnings because this is a true crime channel. I feel like if you're clicking a true crime video, you know that you're in for something that's adult content. It's a little heavy. But something about Anita's case in particular, I feel like I do need to give a little bit of a warning because the sheer brutality of it, it got under my skin because it's just incredibly horrific. Incredibly random, and it's just incredibly rough, heavy, and brutal, and it involves sexual assault, and I thought I could do, you know, what I could to make the story more palatable, but there are some details that I feel like you need to hear to know what complete, absolute dickbags the men who did this to Anita were. And yes, I said men, not man, because it was a group of men who abducted and destroyed Anita. There are a lot of details to this case, and I guess I should just get into telling you the details. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrendous abduction and murder of Anita Lynch Cobby. Anita Lorraine Lynch was born in Sydney, Australia on November 2nd, 1959, making her a Scorpio. She was one of two daughters. Her and her younger sister Catherine were born to parents Gary Bernard Lynch, her father, who was a graphic artist for the Royal Australian Air Force, and Grace Lynch, their mother, who went by the name Peggy and who was a nurse. Anita grew up in a modest household, and her sister were known as just being the exact daughters that any parent could ever ask for. Anita was really good in school. She wasn't really like a rebellious teenager. She didn't stay out late or have any issues with like drugs or alcohol. She was just like a good girl who loved the beach and being outdoors and sports and music and being on the water. She was just like a wholesome lady. And in addition to just being like awesome and a breeze, Anita was stunning. It's honestly kind of insane how beautiful this girl was. Because of how beautiful Anita was, a friend of hers convinced her to join a beauty contest, and all the tickets that were sold, all the money that came from that would be donated to charity. Once Anita agreed that she was actually going to enter the pageant, her and her family were like so cute about it. They were incredibly supportive, and they would go out and like work super hard to sell as many tickets as possible because, you know, all the proceeds were going to charity. And I read that they raised like $10,000, which is like wild to me. How many people do you know? And how many dollars were these tickets? That's what I want to know. But either way, she did enter, and she actually ended up winning and being crowned the winner when she was 20 years old. So after winning this pageant, Anita was on the trajectory of having a very promising career in modeling, but she decided that this wasn't really what she wanted to do. She wanted to do something more useful and more selfless as a career for her life. So she actually ended up following in her mother's footsteps and became a nurse at Sydney Hospital. It didn't take long for Anita to prove that being a nurse really was for her, and she did so good at this job that she ended up getting a position in the specialized field of microsurgery. And apparently this was like a big deal. This is a position a lot of people wanted, but Anita was so good that Anita was the one who got it. She wanted it, she got it. It was while working at the hospital that a 20-year-old Anita would meet the man who would one day be her husband, a 23-year-old nursing student named John Cobby. In an interview after Anita was tragically killed, John said of his first sight of her, and I quote, "Just these ringlets of hair everywhere. God, she was beautiful, and I thought, far too good for me." To John's surprise, Anita did not agree with him in thinking that she was too good for him, because when he asked her out, she said yes, and after their first date, the two were completely in love and inseparable. The two are just a seemingly perfect fit for one another, in addition to just being crazy about each other, which is already like good. Obviously. They also just had very similar interests in music and movies, and obviously like their career choice. And Anita's family loved John. When they met him, they thought he was a perfect match for their daughter, and they were just all about him. They're like, good job, Anita, bringing home a winner. After just over a year of dating, John asked Anita to be his wife, and she was like, hell yeah. And the two were just so excited to get married. And it seemed like everything was coming up Millhouse for them, man, because they also found out that they were pregnant, and they were so excited. They told everyone their news, and they were excitedly planning, you know, their future lives, being husband and wife and being parents. But tragically, Anita found out shortly after finding out that she was pregnant, she found out that she had a miscarriage. And I can't even imagine that. That sounds horrible. Absolutely horrible. I can't imagine like having this idea of a life in your head and finding out that you have this little baby inside of you and telling everyone that you have this little baby inside of you and then finding out that it wasn't going to happen. That just seems unimaginably sad to me. John and Anita did do the best that they could to recover from the miscarriage, and their relationship was capable of withstanding that trauma. And John and Anita were married in a church in March of 1982, effectively making her Anita Cobby. The two rented a little home together and just enjoyed life together, getting some dogs, going out to dinners, going to concerts, just enjoying each other. And after a couple years of marriage, John actually won a bunch of money at the horse races, and he asked Anita, like, what do you want to do? Sky's the limit. How are we going to spend this? And she was like, you know what? I really want to travel. So the two were like, hell yeah, let's go do that. And they went to an extended overseas trip, I think to the US, and they were gone a while. The couple finally returned home in 1985, and they settled back in Sydney. And sadly, with the, you know, the honeymoon atmosphere gone and them having to settle into like real life, like this is real, the relationship sort of started to dissolve. Well, kind of, not really. We're gonna get there. Anita moved back home to live with her parents during this time, and the two kept what happened and what caused the separation pretty quiet. They weren't really open about the specifics, but it was very clear to everyone involved that both Anita and John were really, really broken up about the separation. The two were just kind of in different places mentally, and they wanted different things. And even though they never got a chance to actually get back together, they talked constantly. Apparently they talked almost every single night by phone. And after being separated only a month, they were already talking about getting an apartment and getting back together. They just didn't get a chance to do so. And even the night that Anita died, he had invited her over to hang out, but she was like, oh, sorry, I want to, but I already have plans. So he never got to see her, which is just like my heart. The night of Anita's disappearance on February 2nd, 1986, Anita told her mother, because remember she was staying back at home with her mom at this time, not to worry if she was home late because she was going to be working a late shift at Sydney Hospital, and that after she got off work, her and two of her friends were going to go get dinner and drinks and just have kind of like some girls' time at Redfern. In Redfern, which is a city in Australia. I don't know why my brain thought that was the name of the restaurant for half a second, but no. Redfern is the city in Australia where they were going to be getting dinner and drinks after work. So the girls had their night, they had their dinner, they had their drinks, they just had a good time. And after they were done, both girls that Anita was with offered to let her spend the night with them instead of having to go home, because you know it was late. They had been spending some time together. They're like, hey, you know, spend the night, have a girls' night. She's like, no, it's fine, and insisted that she go home. And they dropped her at the Central Railway station so that she could take her usual train home. Anita did catch her train at the station, and she took it to the Blacktown station, where typically when she would arrive, she would call her father and he would come and pick her up. She'd call him, and no matter what time of night it was, he would get in his car and he'd go over to pick her up so she wouldn't have to walk, because, you know, good daddies, right? I imagine. I don't know for sure, but I think that's what good dads do. Yes? Just kidding. But anyways, for whatever reason this night, she did not call her father, and it's speculated it's because the payphone at the railway station was out of order that night. But seeing as though she didn't call her her father, and I guess there were no taxis available at that time of night, Anita decided that she was going to make the short walk home. At about 10 p.m., as Anita walked along the road on her way home, a car filled with 5 men pulled up next to her. 2 of these men jumped out of the car, grabbed her, and drug her into their car. She fought, she screamed, she did everything she could, but she was overpowered. They were able to get her inside the vehicle, and the car took off into the night with the headlights off. So where this happened, it was actually in a residential area. So when the men got out of the car and started trying to force Anita into their car and she started to scream, the people in the house directly across the street heard it. It was a woman and her 2 kids. And they all ran outside to see what the hullabaloo was about. And this is when they actually witnessed Anita being stuffed into this car. And the woman, her older of the 2 youngest sons, I believe, he was 13 years old, even ran towards the car to try to intervene. But by the time he got there, the car had taken off. So there were witnesses to this abduction. So these people, since they had seen what happened, they like ran inside and they called the cops so that the cops could know right away what happened. And then after that, they were just kind of standing outside, like, what are we supposed to do at this point? So they were standing outside, just kind of standing. Okay. And this is when their neighbors came home and were like, what's going on? Why are you so frantic looking, standing outside? And this is when the woman told her neighbors the whole story of what they just saw happen. So these neighbors were like, oh shit. And they actually jumped in their car and tried to go off looking for the car that had taken Anita. And this car was described as an HT Holden Kingswood. Yeah, that car. Photo was over what I was saying anyway, because I don't know cars. So this car is driving around, you know, with the neighbors in it, trying to find the car that Anita was taken in. And eventually they came upon this area that was across from some horse stables with a bunch of like tall grass. And they did see a car sitting there, but the car was empty and it looked abandoned. So the people in the car were just like, well, this must not be the right car. It was the right car. And they drove away, and it turns out that when this car was there, like with its headlights looking for them, the 5 men had Anita pinned down in the tall grass, like with their hands over her mouth, just hiding there waiting for the car to go away. After the car left Anita and these men alone, they grabbed her and they forced her back inside the car, which by the way was stolen. We'll get into that later, but it was a stolen car. Once inside, they told her to take her clothes off, to which she refused. She was begging with them and pleading with them, trying anything she could, saying that she was scared, saying that she had a family, saying that she had a husband, even saying that she was on her period, anything she could to try to get them not to rape her, because she knew what was coming. I feel like any woman would. In response to her pleas, these 5 men beat her, and they beat her bad. They broke her nose and both of her cheekbones, and then with her bleeding face forced her to perform oral sex on all 5 men, which is just so fucking gross. The men then left and went to a gas station because they realized that they were going to need to make sure that they had gas to get away from this crime scene, and they bought the gasoline with money they stole from Anita's purse. The men then drove back to where they had been, and this time they parked at the horse enclosure where they ripped Anita out of the car and they threw her in a ditch, and the 5 of them took turns raping her over and over and continuing to beat her while they did this. Once the men thought they were done, they drug Anita into a horse stable through a barbed wire fence and just kind of threw her on the ground there. And as they looked at her laying on the ground, beaten, bloody, half conscious, just completely destroyed, they thought, maybe we should just rape her a little bit more. So they did that. Sometimes more than one of them raped her at a time, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, but I'm sure you can imagine. And as they were doing this, and when they were done, and in between, they beat her, they kicked her aggressively in the whole body, face, head, everywhere, until they were satisfied that they were done. Apparently, the initial plan was to leave Anita alive, and the men had even started walking away, like they were done, they were leaving. And this is when one of the 5 men, a man named John Travers, admitted later that he told the men, like, wait a minute, I don't think we can leave her alive because we did all of this, we didn't wear masks, she can identify us, and we've been referring to each other by our real names. With that, The men collectively decided amongst themselves that Anita had to die, and while the other men cheered, John Travers walked back to Anita. He sat on this woman's back as she lay on her stomach. He grabbed her hair to pull her head back, and he slit her throat so deep that he almost decapitated her, killing her. Anita was 28 years old. During the drive home, the men asked John Travers, like, how did it feel to kill somebody? And he said that he didn't feel anything. And then the group joked and boasted about their crimes on the drive home, just like how great it was to rape and torture and kill Anita. When Anita didn't call her father to pick her up from the train station that night and then didn't arrive home, initially her parents didn't freak out too bad. They were a little weird, but they were like, you know, she probably just stayed at one of her friend's house, had a few drinks, and will be home later. I mean, this was 1986. It's not like people had cell phones to check in on these types of things, and Anita was known to occasionally stay with a friend, so they didn't initially freak out. But the following day, one of Anita's coworkers called her parents home when she didn't show up for work, and they were like, hey, you know, is Anita gonna come in today? And this is when absolute panic set in. So they freaked out and they called all of Anita's friends. They called her ex-husband John, just trying to figure out if anybody had heard from her. And when they learned that nobody had, they called and filed a missing persons report on February 3rd and sat worried, freaking out, wondering where their daughter was, with John right alongside them, sharing in the unimaginable stress and worry. It's sad too, because John was initially police's first suspect, because first off, it's always the partner who's the first suspect, because oftentimes it is the partner who committed the murder. And then you add to that the two were separated and police had no way to know, you know, how John was feeling about that. And then when they brought John in, they were like questioning him. He said that he must have done it because he was so distraught that he felt so guilty that he might as well have done it himself. But when police hear him say, oh, I must have done it, they were thinking like, oh, we got our guy. But he did end up being cleared, fortunately, because he didn't do it, but his guilt never left him. And this part's going to break your heart. I'm just going to give you a little warning about that there. During Anita's funeral, this poor man, as they were taking her coffin away after the service, he, first off, had to be held up during the service because he was just like destroyed as a person. And when they started to take her away, he screamed out, "Don't take her away from me, please. Don't take her away." And that makes my heart ache so bad. But anyways, back to before they, you know, found her. Right now she's just missing, and I can't even imagine what that feels like to just know that your daughter is gone. Your daughter is missing. She's young, she's beautiful. It's just horrifying to let all of the ideas of what could have happened to her run through your head, and unfortunately, like, what their ideas were probably weren't even nearly as bad as what actually happened to Anita. Fortunately though, or unfortunately, however you want to think of it, they didn't have to worry very long, because the very next day after the report was filed, Anita's lifeless, naked body was found by a farmer. Apparently this farmer, so he woke up in the morning to do his farmer things, and as he was leaving the house, he noticed that like all of his cows were circling around one spot, and he was like, that's fucking weird. But then he just left because he had some stuff to do. He had to go do his farming things. So he comes back and the cows are still in the exact same place. And he's like, okay, this is really weird. So he walks over to see what they're looking at. And when he gets through the cows and he sees it's Anita's body. And I can't even imagine what that sight must have been like. When police question this farmer, because obviously they're going to question the person who finds the body, he actually tells them also that the night before he did hear yelling, like screaming, coming from this area on his property, but he didn't really think anything of it. And he said that this is also a place that's like a popular lover's lane spot, so seeing a random car there wouldn't have been weird to him either. And you know, it's not the farmer's fault, obviously. It's the freaking assholes who did this to Anita's fault, but I'm sure in hindsight he wishes he had called the police, and I really wonder if he had, what would have happened, if they could have saved her. Who knows, honestly, but that's what happened. Anita's father, Gary Lynch, is the one who had to identify Anita's body, and at the sight of his daughter, he buckled at the knees. He couldn't take it, and the sergeant that was with him, a man named Ian Kennedy, grabbed Gary and just hugged him because he felt so horrible at what this man was going through. So before Anita's father was called in to identify her, they had to get an idea of who she was, right? So that they knew what family to call and be like, I need you to come look. And the way that they figured out that this was Anita so that her father could come and identify her is because she was still wearing her wedding ring, a very distinct wedding ring, at the time that she was killed. So this also proved to police that this wasn't a robbery gone wrong, because they would have taken that ring. This was just some horribly brutal, senseless murder with apparently no real motive. The community at large was horrified by this case. This woman was just ripped off the street and killed so brutally and left in such a horrible position, naked and like garbage on the side of the road, that people were angry and scared. The government of New South Wales even offered up a reward of $50,000 for any information that led to the arrest of Anita's killers, and this was later raised to $100,000. Sadly, though, there wasn't much at the murder scene for police to go on. The crime scene was pretty much absent of evidence. They didn't even have Anita's clothes to try to get any sort of DNA off of. They had taken the clothes with them. They had also taken the murder weapon. And when police were looking into like possible suspects and motives, they came up with nothing and no one. She had no enemies, no spurned lovers. John was cleared. So this was just essentially, this could be anyone. They even looked to see if she had been involved in any sort of like illegal activity that maybe her family didn't know about, but no, there was nothing. It was just something that was seemingly random. And this poor girl's family, okay, so just, oh my God. I don't know if this is gonna make you mad. It definitely annoys me. Well, 2 days after Anita's body was found, on February 6th, a morning radio show host named John Laws, who had somehow gotten a copy of Anita's autopsy report, and obviously this had a ton of really intense details about her case and her cause of death and the condition of her body, and I don't know for sure at this time if her parents even knew exactly what had happened to her, but this radio show host read the autopsy report live on the air. How do you feel about that? Thoughts? Opinions? I would love to know. This is only 2 days after her body was found, so this was very much an ongoing investigation, right? And years later, when he was asked in an interview like, why'd you do that, bro? This is what he said. The general public ought to know. It incited anger in the public that murders like this were happening and we weren't being given the full details. So that was his reasoning for it. So as I said, police had no real leads. There wasn't any evidence. There wasn't anything to go on. So they came up with what I consider to be a very creative and inventive way to try to get information from people and kind of jog their memories on what they might have seen and forgot that they saw on the night that Anita was killed. So what they did is they had a female officer, a woman named Debbie, get dressed in clothes that Anita was wearing the night that she was killed, like almost the exact same outfit, and literally walk Anita's walk. She literally did the entire walk that Anita did that night. She even took the same train that Anita took that night. All the while, a car with more officers in it followed along behind her and showed people photos of Anita and asked them if they had seen anything suspicious. So I think this was kind of genius, and I've never heard of another case doing something like this. So the break in this case actually came when a tip came in that somebody knew about the 3 men, not 5, they said 3 men who had stolen the car that was used the night of Anita's murder, because remember, this car was stolen. Just for clarity, there were 5 men involved in what happened to Anita, but this tip that came in only knew about 3 men who had stolen the car. Okay, just for a lack of confusion. The witness told police that these 3 men had stolen this car, so he had the names of the men who had stolen the car, and that they had just recently repainted the car gray and changed the wheels. This is when police were led to 18-year-old John Travers, 19-year-old Michael Murdoch, and 22-year-old Les Murphy in connection to this case. And looking into these men, they found that a few of them had a history of violent behavior, and that John Travers in particular was known to carry a knife. And seeing as it was a knife that was used to kill Anita, they were like, this is interesting. It's not like for sure, but that's definitely worth making my ears perk. And apparently the name John Travers was not foreign to police officers because they were already looking into him for another rape case. They had been trying to locate him as a person of interest or a suspect in another rape case unrelated to Anita. So these three men were arrested, but they were only arrested initially on suspicion of stealing that car because they kind of wanted to hold them and get more information. But Michael Murdoch and Les Murphy actually ended up getting out on bail, but John Travers wasn't given bail because he was being held on suspicion of that rape as well. While in custody, John Travers was questioned and he ended up giving police conflicting accounts of his, alibi for the night that Anita was abducted and murdered. So John started to clam up. He started to get pretty quiet and he was like, you know what? Can you please call this lady friend of mine so she can bring me some cigarettes because I'm hella stressed. And they're like, you know what? Let's do that. Maybe if we do something nice for him, we can get some information out of him. So they call the number and it turns out that this lady friend is actually one of John's aunts. So they talk to his aunt and they actually tell her like what's going on, what he's in jail for, what he is accused of. And she was like, oh man, what can I do to help? She then goes on to give police all kinds of information on John and his history and who he was and how he was like a violent, awful piece of human garbage. And then she agreed with police that she would wear a wire in her bra when she came to bring him his cigarettes and try to get as much information out of him as she could because she is a winner. Well, I don't know if she's a winner. I don't know her as a person, but this was a winner's thing to do. She came back the next day wearing the wire, brought in the cigarettes, and sat with John Travers. And after about 30 minutes, she exited the room, visibly shaken. Apparently, he made a full confession to his aunt. Not only did he make a full confession, but he bragged about it, and at one point even laughed about it. And she was like, yo, like, don't laugh about that. It's not funny. Not only did he implicate himself in the murder, along with Michael Murdoch and Les Murphy, but he also implicated two other men that were there. 28-year-old Gary Murphy and 33-year-old Michael Murphy. Yes, Murphy. These were Les Murphy's older brothers. It was a family affair, this horrible rape and murder. And later, apparently, this aunt also went to visit Michael Murdoch in prison, wearing a wire, and got him to confess to some stuff as well, which is weird. I couldn't find a lot of information on the relationship between this aunt and Michael Murdoch, but I know that Michael Murdoch and John Travers were like friends growing up, so maybe the aunt was close in the family. I'm not 100% sure. This woman, very good stuff. After this woman actually ended up getting put into the witness protection program because she was scared for the safety of herself and for her kids' lives. And that's pretty much what we got on her. She was like, here, I'm gonna help you. And now I gotta go and I gotta just go. So police, now having this new information, went back out to rearrest Michael Murdoch and Les Murphy. And while they were out there, like, well, we might as well find frickin' Gary Murphy and Michael Murphy. So we got two Michaels here. So just keep that in mind. They found Murdoch and Les Murphy right away, that they weren't difficult to locate, but finding Gary and Michael Murphy proved to be a little bit harder. They ended up actually finding these two men because they got a tip called into police, and this guy who called was like, listen, I'm pretty sure they're like at my neighbor's townhouse, like they're there. So police go, they surround the townhouse and they bust in and they arrest both men. And for reference of what a little baby back bitch these men were, Gary Murphy was so scared when he was arrested that he pissed his pants like a little bitch. As far as Michael Murphy, apparently this man had been arrested, and at the time that he had committed this crime, he had escaped jail. He was an escapee. And now they just rearrested him. It's wild. It's wild, man. When these men were arrested, the community was so stoked that they were in custody. They were like, hang the bastards, or like, give them to us for a couple minutes. We'll take care of it, no problem. Like, they were really invested in this case and very passionate about these men suffering all the consequences that could be suffered for what they did. Once news of the arrests broke to the public, people flooded the police station, surrounded it, just trying to get a look at these dickheads. And there was upwards of 1,500 people surrounding the police station, blocking off all of the streets. All 5 men were charged with murder just 22 days after Anita had been killed. Now, let me give you some backstory, just a little bit, on these pieces of human garbage. First, let's talk about the Murphy brothers and get their little, backstory done in one fell swoop, because honestly, their past isn't that important. They're just a bunch of fucking losers. Les, Michael, and Gary Murphy were all brothers from a family of 9 children. These 3 boys in particular, well, men at the time that we're talking about them, were all known to be troublesome growing up. Michael, the eldest of the 9 children, was actually sent away to live with his grandmother when he was only 12 years old, and he is the one who had actually been the one who had escaped jail at the time that Anita was murdered. Gary, who was a few years younger, had a hearing impairment and had actually found school to be too challenging for him, so he dropped out to try to look for work. He became very interested in cars, and once he went down the road to a life of crime, he had a long rap sheet for car theft. He was also known to have a violent temper, second only to his little brother, Les. Les Murphy was the youngest of the Murphy children and was known to have the most violent temper of them all. He too engaged in the life of crime and alongside his brothers had a rap sheet for theft-related offenses. Next we come to Michael Murdoch. Michael, like the Murphys, had a record, but where the Murphys was mostly theft-related offenses, Michael also had some experience with sexual assaults. Michael was a childhood friend of John Travers, and he graduated from just being friends with John to being a fellow partner in crime. And now John Travers. There seems to be more information on John Travers specifically than any of the other men. Kind of makes sense since his aunt's the one who took part in helping bring him down, and also he's the one who actually committed the murder. They all did it, but he's the one who actually, John Raymond Travers was the eldest of 8 children born into a pretty poor family. His parents had him when they were just teenagers themselves, and his father ended up leaving the family pretty early on, so John started getting involved in the life of crime to provide for his family a little bit, but he ended up progressing from just, trying to help his family to getting worse and worse, and his crimes got less altruistic and ended up getting him sent to a juvenile detention center by his own mother. She was like, yo, you're a lot. You gotta just get out of my house, bro. There are also reports that he had some violent sexual deviant behavior. He had at one point purchased a live sheep and trigger warning for animal abuse and just full-on effing grossness. Apparently while the sheep was alive, he cut its throat and sodomized it while it was still alive and then threw it on a fire pit to cook it up and eat it. To which I say, what the fuck? So these are the type of guys that we're dealing with here. The trial for these men began on March 16th, 1987, and all 5 men were charged with the murder of Anita Lynch Cobby. And initially they all pled not guilty to the crime, but randomly, like on the first day of trial, John Travers decided to change his tune and he pled guilty. He said he was the only one that did it and took full responsibility for the murder. Which, weird flex, but okay. I'm now going to give you a little bit of information on the condition of Anita's body so you can hear how bad they brutalized her. If you want to skip ahead a little bit, feel free to do so. According to the medical examiner's report, Anita's body showed extensive bruising on her head, breasts, face, shoulders, groin, thighs, and legs consistent with a systematic beating, including a blow of considerable force around the right eye. She had lacerations on her hips, thighs, and legs from the barbed wire fence, several cuts to her neck, resulting in the severing of her ear and windpipe and near decapitation, and many cuts to her hands and fingers, resulting in the near severing of 3 of her fingers, which likely occurred when she raised her hand to protect her face from the knife. All the men, except for John Travers, of course, tried to spin the narrative that they were much less involved than everybody thought. They said that they were involved in the abduction, yes, but they did not take part at all in the beating, at all in the rape, or at all in the murder, to which the jury was like, for sure, dude. Totally believe you. Sounds reasonable. Yeah. In hearing these men's various recountings of the night, the jury and the court were able to put together a sort of timeline of what did happen that night. Apparently these 5 men had been drinking that night at a hotel when they decided they wanted to go on a joyride in their stolen car. They had it, they might as well use it. If you don't use it, you lose it, or so they say. So they were like, okay, there's one problem. We don't have any money, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna drive a little bit, we're gonna find a woman with a purse. We're then going to rob her of her purse so we can take her money, so we can put gas in the car, so we can go on our joyride. This is when the group came upon Anita with her purse thrown over her shoulder, and they decided that she was the one. So John Travers and Michael Murdoch jumped out of the car, grabbed her, and stuffed her in the car. She really, truly was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, where these assholes were. This is when the men told her to undress, which she refused to do, so they stripped her and beat her, and she fought really hard, but she was just outnumbered, and I can't even imagine how scary that was for her. On June 10th, 1987, all 5 men were found guilty of both the sexual assault and the murder of Anita Lynch Cobby, and all were given life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice Alan Maxwell described the crime to the court as, and I quote here, "one of the most horrifying physical and sexual assaults. This was a calculated killing done in cold blood. The executive should grant the same degree of mercy to these men as they bestowed upon their victim." So, he continued by saying, "There is no doubt that apart from the humiliation, the degradation, and the terror inflicted upon this young woman, she was the victim of a prolonged and sadistic physical and sexual assault, including repeated sexual assaults anally, orally, and vaginally." He also recommended that all of these men's files be clearly marked that they are never to be released. And for a little fun fact for us, because I think sometimes we like seeing a little bit of street justice, if you know what I'm saying. Apparently, like right after getting arrested, all of these men got the absolute shit beat out of them because, you know, just all over the world, prisoners do not like other prisoners who commit crimes like this. And apparently in Australia, people refer to these type of criminals as rock spiders, which is just like, other countries have the absolute best terms. That's all I'm saying. And now for a quick Where Are They Now segment. As of 2021, John Travers is still in prison. He's known as being a pretty difficult prisoner. He's constantly in bloody fights, threatening prison staff, and he was even found trying to escape a prison van once by using a hacksaw and kicking out the van's back door. But he was caught. So he's still like a giant loser who cannot just keep his shit together and act right. Okay, so it's good that he is where he is, obviously. It's good that all of them are where they are, but look at this asshole. What a loser. Michael Murphy died in 2019 at the age of 66 after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. Prior to that, his prison time was mostly uneventful. There aren't a lot of reports of him being in trouble, but at one point his status did go from maximum security to medium security, and then right after that it went back to maximum security, so clearly he was up to something. He also ended up finishing a little bit of school, and while in prison he got to spend a little time incarcerated with his brother Gary, so good for him having a friend in there for like a bit, which he shouldn't, but I mean, what are we gonna do? As of 2021, Gary Murphy is still in prison. He's had a little bit of good and a little bit of bad in prison. You know, at one point he did get to hang out with his brother Michael Murphy, which must have been nice for him. But in 2019, he was jumped in the prison shower and he was beaten pretty badly. So, you know, he's got a little bit of a balance thing going on. A little good, a little bad. Fuck him. Les Murphy is still in a maximum security prison as of 2021, and his sentence has been mostly uneventful. And as far as Michael Murdoch, he too is in a maximum security prison and also uneventful. Anyways, back to Anita now and the aftermath. In remembrance of Anita and her hometown of Blacktown, there was a park named for her. It was named the Anita Cobby Reserve. So that's something for her. Her sister was interviewed nearly 30 years after Anita was killed, and she said of the situation, and I quote, "I do wonder sometimes what my life would be like today if my sister was here with me. She would have wanted us to get on with our lives for sure, because that's what she was all about, living life." After Anita's death, her parents actually went on to create the Homicide Victim Support Group, a group that helps families who have dealt with loss due to homicidal violence, and they actually created this group alongside another pair of parents, Peter and Christine Simpson, who were the parents of a girl named Ebony Simpson, who was also murdered. In 1992, Ebony was kidnapped after she got off of her school bus and started to walk home from school. Her body was found 2 days later. She had been bound, sexually assaulted, and then drowned. She was 9 years old. So these parents band together and created this group to try to, you know, help themselves and also help other parents who had gone through something similar, which is just like an incredibly commendable thing to do in the aftermath of losing a child, which I just can't even imagine doing anything after that, let alone something that's also good for other people. You know what I mean? It just seems like a lot. Both of her parents have since passed away. Gary passed away in 2008 at the age of 90, and his wife followed him in 2013, and she was 88. At the time that Gary died, when they were first separated in life, they had been married for 54 years. Which is just wild, actually, because you hear a lot of times that after parents lose a child, it's really difficult for the marriage and the relationship to survive it, because they're just, I don't know why. I've never been in that situation, but you hear about it a lot, that after the death of a child, the couple breaks up, it's hard to see each other and be reminded of the kid and looking at your partner. But they stuck around and they stayed together and they were each other's rock. And I don't know how they did it, because I can't, the idea of losing a child is so horrifying to me that I don't know how anyone survives it, let alone a relationship surviving it. Anita's husband and friend John has never been able to recover from what happened to her. I mean, honestly, how could you? I don't know how a person could. And he says that even after all of these years, he has still refused to learn the name of the people who killed her. He says knowing it would only bring him more pain, knowing it wouldn't change anything, and just recognizing it and accepting it just makes it all too real for him. And I can understand that. He has also chosen to avoid any and all media stories. Anything that covers Anita's death, he just avoids it altogether. And he actually at one point left the country on the anniversary of her death just to try to avoid all the coverage. He has said several times that he blames himself for her death, and he had reportedly moved to America and changed his name and become sort of a recluse. It's honestly really sad. He got really into drugs and drinking, where before her death, he was like totally opposed to these things. But he just couldn't deal with the pain, and he said that he saw her face everywhere. He did end up leaving America and moving back to Sydney, and I do believe that's where he lives now. And he says that a part of him died the day that Anita died, and that he's never been the same since. In an interview John finally did 30 years after Anita was murdered, he told the Daily Telegraph, and I quote, "I blamed myself for her dying, and I still do. I should have been with her." And that's just so terrible, dude. Like, him feeling that way, I can't even imagine living with that. And I honestly feel so fucking bad for that guy. And just hearing that is so terrible, man. I can't imagine him living, feeling that way. And it just breaks my heart to hear it. But I get why he feels it. And that, my friends, is the story of the horrific murder of Anita Lynch Cobby. Let's just shake that one off a bit. I know it's really heavy, and it's like a lot. It's a lot to take in. Something about this case really gets in my head, and it gives me a little bit of anxiety, because I think it's because I am a pedestrian perpetually. I don't have a driver's license, so I'm always walking everywhere if I go anywhere. And the idea of just being ripped off the street so randomly and not being able to do there's nothing you can do. You can't defend yourself. That many people, it's just like, it's too much to let my brain go there. Those men were just such absolute pieces of shit. How do people like that, one, exist, and two, how are they able to like find each other? I've never understood that. Like, how does that conversation come up where you find out that the people around you are those type of fucking asshole monsters? Like, because I tell you what, if I'm driving around with a group of my friends and they're like, hey, let's fucking abduct this woman, I'm gonna be like, no, like there's no way you're gonna get me to do something like that. And I just feel so bad for everybody that cared about her, you know, because if they looked into this case at all, they have to know everything that happened to her. They have to know how much she suffered and how much she was brutalized before she died. And to live with that knowledge of that, all of that happening, everything that I've just said happening to somebody that you love and you care about, I don't know how anyone deals with it. And I can completely see why John just fucking ran away from all of that. I get why he just needed to like get away and stay away and disappear and not learn their names and just to have all that guilt and to like not be able to let it become too real in his head. Cause man, if anything ever happened to my husband, I would have to literally disappear off the planet. I could not do it. So I don't know. But anyways, guys, with that said, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting, informative, and of course I hope you take something away from it, because I feel like it's important to talk about. That's why I'm putting the video out into the world, because her case is important and it matters and she matters. And of course I want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Anita with me today. She seemed like just a beautiful person and what she went through. My God, it's just horrific and it's horrible, and I can't even like truly full on imagine it. Like I can and I can't, because it's just so much. And she didn't deserve what happened to her. No one could ever deserve to go through that. And I hope that these men that are still alive suffer daily, all the time. Just pain, hate, fuck, my God. I hope they are destroyed internally and physically the same way that they destroyed her. But I know that that's not how the world works, so I gotta get out of this one. So please let me know down below of any other cases you would like to see me cover, because as you know, I have a long, long list. I recently numbered my list. It's over 300 cases that I want to cover, but every single time that you leave a case suggestion, I add your name so that I can give you a shout out for your suggestion, because I want to look into the cases you're interested in, because I know you're filled with good taste and good ideas, otherwise you would not be here. Please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you'd like to follow me on my other social media, everything will be linked down below. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook page, and Facebook group. And I also always list all the makeup, earrings, all that jazz down below in case you want to get some of it, because I know it's pretty and it's cool. Look at this glittery eyeshadow. It's amazing. Love it. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That's tight. You're tight. Please be safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. At the bare minimum, be better than the people who murdered Anita. And with that said, that's all. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.